Hello there. We are live again. We're glad that you're with us. I hope you've had a good week since we last met. A lot of this good stuff going on, and I'm just really excited to be here to talk about some of these things we're going to talk about tonight. And I'm hoping that that you get a lot out of this. Just have so much to go through, and we're looking forward to good internet service tonight. I hope that that works out good. We seem to have had lots of problems with our connection recently, but we're glad that you're with us. Now, as we're getting started, I always want to take this opportunity to invite you to come and be with us. You are welcome to come and be with us and to study the scriptures and to learn and to grow. Our address is 2675 Kentucky Avenue. We're in Indianapolis, Indiana, of course. That's 46221 is our zip code. So we'd love to have you come and be with us on our worship times. You can go to our website and find out more about our congregation. There's some information there. That website is westsidecoc.org. So we would love to have you check that out. You can also go to YouTube. You can watch this on YouTube. Matter of fact, it's archived both on Facebook and YouTube. Just a little better on YouTube. You can actually find the programs a little easier. But YouTube, our YouTube channel, Restoration Movement 2.0. So check that out and see all the good stuff that's on there. Outside of that, we're looking forward to a good study here tonight. We're going to continue talking about judgment. This will be our fourth installment about this. And I think I've got about 161 more to go or something like that. But I'm just going to try to keep up. Well, forget that. Either way, we're looking forward to this. So we're going to just jump right into this. We're going to start talking about judgment. Now, I want to recap just a little, in case you missed some of these things in the previous episodes. So, hey, wait a minute. It just occurred to me. I'm having an episode tonight. Don't look at me like that. Anyway, so we're in the previous episodes, or installments, whatever you want to call them, you can check those out and see here a little more in detail. And I know that we kind of recap and go over some of those things in each segment, but that's okay. We need to do that to keep everybody abreast of what's going on. Let me, as you're turning to Matthew 25, let me state this as clearly and concisely as I can. There has been the day of judgment that the scriptures speak of already. Judgment day has occurred already. The judgment of the just and the unjust has passed already. The judgment that we read of in Revelation chapter 20 and 21, I guess you could go there too, has already occurred. These things have already taken place. Now, we're going to talk about this because Jesus foretold this in Matthew chapter 25. Now, I have got to say that when it comes to the words of Jesus, what he said was either right or it was a lie. Wait a minute. Did I really just say that? Yes, I did. The reason I say that, Jesus either told the truth or he didn't. Now, here's why I say that judgment day has already occurred. And I know this is a little bit of a recap, but when we look at Matthew chapter 24 and verse 34, notice what Jesus said. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. C.S. Lewis said that this was the most troubling verse in all of the scriptures, because this verse, Jesus plainly and clearly said judgment is going to occur in your lifetime. Now you might be saying, oh no, it didn't say that. But yes, it did. It does say that. Let's look at this. Jesus talks about judgment before verse 34. Okay, so let's go back to Matthew chapter 24 and notice here in verse 29. We'll just do this, okay? This has to be simple enough. In verse 29, he says, but immediately after the tribulation of those days. Well, what days was he talking about? He was talking about these days when Jerusalem is surrounded, according to the other two accounts, Mark 13, Luke 21. He's talking about this time when there will be a time of distress or trouble such as never was before, and he said never will be again. So that limits it to when this occurs, it's never going to happen again. So he's saying when you see these events take place, you need to leave. Now notice what he says in verse 29. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. Now, this is the exact same language that we see being used in other places in the scriptures to describe Judgment Day. Okay, so this Judgment Day that we're discussing, we're talking about, is what Jesus was talking about here. Now, I have to define terms here. And there are a lot of times that I say things, and I'll say them in an accommodative way. And here's what I mean by that. This accommodative language, and Jesus even used this from time to time, and I think we could probably find other instances where maybe Paul and Peter used it. But this accommodative language, he's using language that was common to the understanding of the common people that he was talking to. He didn't really necessarily care all of the time about being hyper-technical. So he would use these terms that would evoke the thought in the mind of the hearer. And I try to do the same thing. I'm trying to use terminology that we're all familiar with. Do I believe that there are judgments coming in the future? Yes, I do. Do I believe that there will be a final judgment at the end of time? No, I do not. The scriptures do not teach a final judgment at the end of time, because there is no place in the scriptures that talks about the end of time. I just went there. I just said that. And the reason I said that is because it's true. You cannot find one scripture in the entire New Testament, in the entire Old Testament. If you're focusing on Torah, you're definitely not going to find it. If you're focusing on Tanakh, you're not going to find it. If you're focusing on the New Covenant, you're not going to find it. And here's the reason why. Because it's not there. You're not going to find it because it's not there. So this judgment that I'm talking about is the judgment, this great judgment, this judgment of the just and the unjust. We'll talk about this a little more in detail, I hope, by the time we're done here this evening. This judgment of the just and the unjust, this great day of judgment that people expect to come in the future, has already taken place. Now, I know you're saying, oh, let's get the mouse and let's click out of this. Don't do that. Give this a chance. Give the scriptures a chance. Don't give me a chance. Don't believe a word I have to say. I'm asking you, don't believe what I have to say, but believe what the scriptures teach and what the scriptures say. That's what's important. And that's what we're going to look at. We're going to look at what the scriptures have to say about judgment. We already have. Okay, so Jesus said that he was going to come. Now notice this. Immediately after the tribulation of those days, this destruction of Jerusalem, most every scholar, biblical scholar in the world, modern times anyway, at least, is going to agree that this section of Scripture, Matthew chapter 24, up through verse 34, is talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. So Jesus says he's going to come after the tribulation of those days. The sun, this is verse 29, Matthew 24, we already read this, is going to be dark, and the moon's not going to give its light, and the stars are going to fall from heaven. Isn't that judgment day language? It certainly is. Now let's ask this question. Jesus said these things are going to happen in the lifetime of some standing here. Other passages, Matthew 16, 27 and 28, also Mark 8, 38 and 9, verse 1, teach the very same thing. Okay, so we're looking at this, and Jesus said this is going to happen in the lifetime of the people standing here. Not people 2,000 years later. You know, that would be just downright mean of Jesus to do that to those people. To give them a false hope, to give them just, wouldn't that be miserable to live that way? I remember when I was thinking Jesus was coming in my lifetime, how frightened I was all the time. I lived every day thinking, oh, Jesus is going to come. And then you couple that with the perfectionism that I was taught as a youth and growing up in the Church of Christ. Um, that made me terrified. I didn't. I felt like I was in bondage until I learned the truth, and the truth sets you free, and it did me, and it will you too if you just listen to the words of your Savior and take Him at His word. Don't listen to the scholars. Don't not necessarily anyway. I mean, men have good opinions, and we can listen to those. But you know what? The Bible is the final authority. So if we're going to try to be a Christian, we're going to try to do the Lord's will, and we're trying to do as the Scriptures indicate, then guess what? We're going to let the Scriptures interpret the Scriptures. Men can give us their thoughts and so forth, and that's great, unless they're wrong, and the Scriptures are going to teach us that. Okay, so Jesus was saying that this judgment was going to happen in their lifetime. Now, some would say, okay, well, up through verse 34, that's fine. But after that, verse 36 is a transition verse, and he's transitioning to talking about the end of the world because the apostles asked 3 questions about when will the end of the world be, and that is not what they asked. Get your interlinear out. I'll tell you what, you can do this right now and still listen, maybe, if you can figure out how to work a computer better than I do. You can get your book out, but whatever. Just type in these verses and look at verse 3 of Matthew 24. And in the interlinear, it's going to say, not world, but the end of the age. Okay, so the judgment is going to occur at the end of the age. This is all really one question. It might be, 2 or 3 parts depending on how you parse this, but he's talking about this judgment occurring at the end of the age, not at the end of the world. That is what the Scriptures teach. Men and the traditions of men teach that it's the end of the world. And I can tell you this, that we have been duped by the so-called scholars and the so-called knowledgeable translators because they wrote into these translations, and even my New American Standard Bible that I really like this. I think it's good. But even they put some things in here to support their theological positions, their eschatological positions. And that is problematic at best. So, Jesus is not talking about the end of the world, it's the end of the age. Now, we have to understand, what age was he talking about? What age was he living in? What age was he talking about and telling these people, this is going to happen in your lifetime? The end of the Mosaic age happened in their lifetime. It was yet to happen in the time of Paul. Paul, we see plenty of places where Paul still was going to the temple. He was paying the price that he needed to for some others. He was worshiping there. He was shaving his head. He was going there for the Passover and different things during his lifetime. And why would he do that if everything ended at the cross? Well, we just don't have enough time to go through all this. I will end up at 170 videos or something like that. So, but why would Paul do that? Because the end of the age was the end of the Mosaic age. Now, when did the law of Moses come to an end? Well, that law was going to come to an end. Jesus plainly stated this when everything was fulfilled. Now, look at this. This is Matthew chapter 5. Jesus says clearly in verse 17, Matthew 5, verse 17, do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. So Jesus said, I came to fulfill the law and the prophets. Now that's important, because all of these prophecies concerning Jesus, if they were not fulfilled, then the law of Moses could not be removed and taken out of the way. Heaven and earth could not be destroyed. The law of Moses equals heaven and earth. Heaven and earth equals the law of Moses, to be very basic about this. So let's read this again. Matthew 5, verse 17. Do not think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but to fulfill. Now in Hebrew, paralleling, the next verse, he just describes the exact same things that he said, just in a different way. A little more information, a little clearer, adds a little to it, but it's the exact same thing. So in verse 17, he says the law and the prophets will not disappear until all is fulfilled. And then he says in verse 18, truly I say to you, until heaven and earth, vis-a-vis the law of Moses, passes away. Listen to this. Until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest stroke or letter will pass from the law until all is accomplished, until all is filled. The law of Moses will not be destroyed, or heaven and earth will not be destroyed until all is fulfilled. Heaven and earth being the law of Moses. Okay. Now, that leaves us with a real problem. Because traditionally we have been told that heaven and earth is always literal. And every time we read this heaven and earth, that it's a literal thing. And it's this dirt and it's this sky. Jesus did not teach that. He did not go there. That's not what they believe. It's not their Hebraisms. It's not the phraseology that they use. It's not the idioms that they use. It is not their understanding. Yes, they understood. They knew that sometimes heaven meant the physical sky above us, and other times earth meant the dirt that you walk on. But there's plenty of places where we read of a not literal heaven and earth. Now let me give you an example of this. What do you suppose the new heavens and earth are? You ever thought about that? Okay, come over here to Revelation 21. So Revelation chapter 21 teaches that the new heaven and earth will appear after the old heaven and earth is destroyed. Is that literal? Just ponder that for a moment. Is this new heavens and earth of Revelation 21, verse 1, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth passed away. Now, are those both literal, or are they spiritual in meaning? I say that they're both spiritual in meaning. Because the first heaven and earth that passed away was the law of Moses. Now, when did it pass away? At verse 11 of Revelation 20. Then I saw a great white throne, and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away. Now, are you going to tell me this is literal or figurative? Because in my mind, I'm seeing the earth sprouting legs and running away. Is that really what happened? Come on. No, we know that that's not literal. It can't be literal. Let's read this again. Revelation 20, verse 11, I saw a great white throne and him who sat upon it, from whose presence earth and heaven fled away. Is that figurative? You know it's figurative. If you say that's literal, I don't know anyone who would actually go there. Although I know lots of people who, until they read this, they go, oh yeah, heaven and earth is literal. When we read it, it's literal. Sure it is. Then show me how that's literal. Then verse 12, he says, and I saw the dead, the great and the small, standing before the throne, and the books were open, lost my place, and another book was open, which is the book of life. The dead were judged from the things which were written in the books, according to their deeds. And the sea gave up the dead which were in it, and death and Hades gave up the dead which were in them, and they were judged, every one of them, according to their deeds. So when is heaven and earth destroyed? At the judgment. Oh. Yep, I just said it. At the judgment. That is funny. I'm sorry. I won't even tell them what you're doing. Hold an ice pack on your eye. I looked over there and I was distracted by that. Happened to me, and plus I needed to take a drink anyway. So it gets dry. Okay, so when is heaven and earth going to be destroyed? At the judgment. Everybody knows that. This is not a surprise. So then why did Jesus back in Matthew say that heaven and earth was going to be destroyed within that generation? Because it's the law of Moses. Now let's go back to Matthew chapter 24. I could have made a few more points out of Revelation, but we'll run out of time really fast. Okay, so here we are. We've established that judgment is going to occur at the end of the age, not the end of the world. So when judgment occurs, heaven and earth is destroyed in a figurative sense. It's the law of Moses. Let me show you something about heaven and earth. How about Deuteronomy chapter 31? Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 31. This illustrates about heaven and earth being that old covenant, being that system that had been put in place for Israel, old covenant Israel. Verse 24, Deuteronomy 31. It came about when Moses finished writing the words of the law in this book until they were complete, that Moses commanded the Levites who carried the ark of the covenant of the Lord, saying, take this book of the law and place it beside the ark of the covenant of the Lord your God, that it may remain there as a witness against you. So what were they putting in the ark of the covenant that was a witness? It was the law of Moses. There's, right? The law of Moses, and we see this in plenty of other places, and Jesus even refers to the law of Moses being a witness using this kind of a legal term in John chapter 5, verses 44 to 47. Okay? He says that in that passage, John 5, 44 to 47, he says, it is Moses that accuses you. He's the witness against you. You see that? That's pretty cool. Okay, so back to Deuteronomy 32. We see that the law of Moses placed inside the Ark of the Covenant to remain there as a witness against them. Verse 27, for you and your rebellion and your stubbornness, behold, while I'm still alive with you today, you have been rebellious against the Lord. How much more then after my death? So Moses, if anybody knew Israel and the children of Israel, this Jewish nation, if anybody knew them and their stubbornness and their rebellion, it was Moses. And he said, when I'm gone, this law is still going to be there as a witness against you. It's not going anywhere. Let's keep reading. Verse 28, he says, let's try this again. Assemble to me all the elders of your tribes and your officers, that I may speak these words in their hearing and call, now notice this, the heavens and the earth to witness against them. Now, what was the witness that was placed in the Ark of the Covenant? Who is this witness for? And then what is this witness? That's this thing that's these words that are being spoken, they're hearing, that is a witness against it. It's the law of Moses. He uses the term interchangeably. And not only here, but there's all kinds of passages in the Old Testament that refers to the law of Moses, that old covenant system, the Jewish polity, I guess you might say, as heaven and earth. Now, this is not lost to academia. They know this, but it really destroys their arguments for a future return of Jesus, a future coming of Jesus, I guess you might say. Okay, so where are we at? Heaven and earth, in this case, Matthew 5, also Matthew 24, verse 34. Guess what? Means the law of Moses. So when does judgment occur? When heaven and earth is destroyed. It's part of those events of judgment. The judgment that was promised to be coming. Now, what is judgment? See, we've been studying here from Matthew chapter 25, there in verse 31. Really, we haven't got very far from verse 31 because we're trying to build the case. We're setting the context. We've been building the foundation. Now, here it is. This building is getting built. Look how fast it's going up. This is better than a prefab home, okay? This is going up. Oh, you got to be kidding me. Okay, I guess we're having some problems with our audio. Are we confirming this? Oh, why does this always have to say that? Do this? Somebody type in. Is it sounded okay? Is this a confirmed thing? Yeah. Okay. The only thing I know to do is to stop this broadcast and restart it at the hopes we'll have better audio the next time. Yeah, I see a couple comments here, so that really sticks. Okay, so if you're listening and you can understand this, I'm going to end this. I'm going to end this one, and I'm going to come right back with another live feed. So just hang on and sign back onto that. Give me just a few minutes, or actually just a few seconds. It'll only take just a moment. So if you can hear this, we are going to shut this one down. We're going to start up again, and we are going to do this in just 3 seconds. Or we're going to count down. Ready? 3, 2, 1. See you in just a second. Sign back in. If you're on Facebook, or actually YouTube, you can. I'm sure you can hear this pretty good. So let me figure out how to do this here, and we'll try. Oh, there it is. Okay, number 2. Okay, so we're going to go live here on Facebook, and we're going to see how this works. Hopefully the video is good and the sound is good, and I just can't figure this one out. It happens all the time. So hopefully you're coming back with us, and we're going to get ramped up here in just a moment. We should, oh, there we are. I forgot to hit go live. Whoops. Okay, here we are back. I hope that this is good, and if it gets too bad, I guess you might be able to have a better feed on YouTube, although you don't get all the comments from Facebook. But hopefully you're with us again, and we're gonna just try to jump right back into this. I sure hate to do this to everybody and make that inconvenient on you, but technology, I'm thankful that we can do this, but it just sometimes it doesn't work great. All right, let's get back into this. Hopefully, we've got enough giving everybody enough time to get back into this. So I'm going to just start here at Matthew 25, verse 31. This judgment. We're defining what judgment is. When it occurred, we're establishing that. We're making our case for when this occurred. Judgment was to occur when? When did the scripture say? Judgment that we're talking about, this judgment of the just and the unjust, was to occur at the end of the age. We could even go to 1 Corinthians 15 if we really wanted to spend a lot of time on this, and this might help everybody have enough time to get ramped back up here. We could even go to 1 Corinthians 15, and we can look at this, and we can see that there through verses 12 through 28 or so, we can establish this. And we can see that all of these things were to take place when the end comes. You see that? So when were all of these things to take place? When was the resurrection supposed to take place? When was judgment supposed to take place? The judgment of the just and the unjust. And that's significant. Okay? We have to understand the judgment of the just and the unjust is extremely significant. And here's the reason why. There are plenty of judgments that occurred in the Old Covenant. We're going to look at a couple of those here in just a moment from the book of Isaiah, at least two. Judgment occurred, but it was not the judgment of the just and the unjust. But the same language is used, the same setting is used, the time frame is used, specified when these events are to take place, when judgment is to take place. Now, this doesn't have to be really hard. The hardest thing about this, and for me, it just never really made sense, because I had people telling me, and I would read a passage where Jesus would say, "This is going to happen to you," and I could see him, I could envision him in my head pointing to them, saying, "This is going to happen to you people, not your 50th generation removed great-grandchildren, to you people. This is going to happen to you." So they would say, "Well, no, that's not what that means." They would also reinvent terms and redefine terms. Those who hold the first century belief, like me, some call it preterist, but that first century Christianity belief, like me, some who hold that get charged that we redefine terms. Who redefined terms? Because you can tell me that soon means 2,000 years, and that's not redefining terms. I'll tell you what you did. You listen. If you believe soon means 2,000 years, if you believe at hand, let's see how we do this. At hand, that's almost 3D, isn't it? I'm easily distracted. I'm sorry. If you think at hand means 2,000 or 2 million years, guess what? You've been duped. You have been sold a bill of goods, and you bought it, and you love it. That's not what the scriptures teach. Soon means soon. And I know there's passages that in the Old Testament that talk about things happening soon, and we know that it was 700 years, but they give you a time frame as to when soon is going to happen. So you see this countdown from the Old Testament. Soon might have meant that these events were coming, they're at hand. They may be proleptical. It's like it's already, but not yet. But you know what? We see that time frame shrinking from 700 years, 400 years to 40 years to the time is just about at hand. He's standing right at the door. And then Jesus says, yes, I am coming quickly. You see it shrink and shrink and shrink because of all of these time statements. Now, that's what we have to keep in mind. So when Jesus said, these events are going to take place within this generation, that's what makes sense. Not when someone's telling me that this passage, that this passage you look at that says it's going to happen in their lifetime, that's the same thing. When they tell you, no, that's not what it says, that's the same thing as you going out and look at the sky on a bright sunny day and it's nice blue sky, and you look up there and you say, that's a blue sky, and someone says to you, oh, no, it's not. That's purple. That's purple, and you need to understand that's purple. Really? Okay, so we've established a couple of things. When judgment was to occur at the end of the age. I didn't spend a lot of time on that. We've done that before, and we'll continue to do it again. We're talking about what is judgment. Okay, so we're trying to make the point about this is the judgment of the just and the unjust. But we have to go back and look at the Old Testament scriptures, because remember, the scriptures interpret the scriptures. Jesus even said, John chapter 5, let's mark this in our minds and in our Bibles and remember what Jesus said. And then when some man comes to you and he says, guess what? That's not what the Bible says, and you shouldn't be studying the Old Testament, and you don't need the Old Covenant. Listen to what Jesus says, John 5. Notice here, this is in verse 45. Do not think that I will accuse you before the Father. The one who accuses you is Moses. Remember, we just talked about this a moment ago. In whom you have set your hope. Now, what was their hope? What had he just been talking about? Resurrection. He says, you've set your hope in Moses. Right? You've set your eschatological beliefs in Moses. The restoration of Israel. But he goes on here to say, verse 46, if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words? Now let's go back here and let's look at exactly what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, when he said, go back and read the Old Testament, Daniel in that case. When he quoted all of these Old Testament things in the Olivet Discourse, he quotes Daniel. He quotes Isaiah. He talks about David. Let's think about this. And let's go to Isaiah 13. But while you're going there, let's think about this. So Jesus quotes from all these passages. He uses the terminology that was used in the Old Covenant. When did it change? When did the meaning from that Old Covenant, that Old Testament, the words that the Hebrews used, Jesus being the epitome of a Hebrew? He was the Hebrew of Hebrews, right? He was the Jew of Jews, and he's using the language that God gave them to communicate with each other. And if anyone could use that masterfully and command it, it was Jesus. So he uses this terminology. Why would it have changed? Remember something. Jesus was born under the Old Covenant. He was not born in the New Testament times. And even if he was, it was still in that transition period. But he wasn't. He was born of a woman under the law of Moses, according to Hebrews. Keep that in mind. So, here we are. We're going, I guess I should turn over there. Isaiah chapter 13. Now, Isaiah 13 illustrates some judgment language for us. Now, let's look at this. This is Isaiah 13. Notice here in verse 6. Ready for this? I'm going to try to read this dramatically, okay? Give it some punch, pizzazz, yahoo, and how. Okay, that's what I'm going to do. Can you listen to this? Isaiah 13, verse 6. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. Oh, wait, before I keep reading. What is the day of the Lord? Well, that sounds pretty familiar. we read this in the New Testament, don't we? Peter talked about it. Jesus talked about it. The apostles asked about it in the Olivet Discourse. When's this day of the Lord going to happen? That's exactly what they were asking. Wail, for the day of the Lord is near. It will come about as destruction from the Almighty. Therefore, all hands will fall limp, and every man's heart will melt. They will be terrified. Pains and anguish will take hold of them. They will writhe like a woman in labor. They will look at one another in astonishment, their faces aflame. Behold, the day of the Lord is coming, cruel with fury and burning anger, to make the land a desolation. And he will exterminate its sinners from it. For the stars of the heavens and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it flees or rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil, and the wicked for their iniquity. And I will also put an end to the arrogance of the proud. Wait, this is sounding familiar. We've already read some of this stuff in the New Testament. Let's keep reading. He says, I will punish the world for its evil, verse 11, Isaiah 13. And the wicked for their iniquity, and put an end to the arrogance of the proud, and abase the haughtiness of the ruthless. I will make mortal man scarcer than gold, pure gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken in its place at the fury of the Lord of hosts, and in the day of his burning anger. Let's just stop right there. Whoa. Here we read, maybe I was wrong. I said that the Bible doesn't talk about the end of time and the earth ever being destroyed. And listen, did you hear what we just read? Oh, wait a minute. We've got to read something. Maybe this will help clear it up. Look at verse 1 of Isaiah 13. Okay, somebody out there, just read it out loud real fast. Okay, let me help. The oracle concerning Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos saw. So what was this destruction talking about? Babylon. Babylon. Not the end of the world. But yet he says the earth is going to be shaken, didn't he? He talked about the burning anger of the Lord, didn't he? He did. Okay, so we have to admit that this is talking about under Hebrew terminology, the way they understood things, the way they talked about things. The destruction of what? Babylon. And its impending judgment. And judgment coming upon Babylon. This is judgment language. Now, why would Jesus use, and Paul and Peter use a completely different set of words to describe the things that were prophesied in the Old Testament? I mean, why would they change the meaning of it? They didn't. They used the same meaning. Okay. Just a couple pages forward in your Bible. Isaiah chapter 19. These two are real close together. They're easy to remember. And we're just gonna roll with this. All right. So Isaiah chapter 19. Notice here in verse 1. Okay, so since the cat's out of the bag, you're already going, well, we better read verse 1. So we'll just go ahead and read it. Isaiah 19, verse 1. The oracle concerning Egypt. Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. Jesus talked about clouds, right? Am I right about that or wrong? Yeah? Okay. She says I'm right, so I'm right. Hey, I'm not going to argue with my wife. I have learned better. I know. I've learned from the scriptures. Listen to your wife. Yeah. So just saying. Okay, so we read verse 1. So we know that what's coming now is talking about Egypt. Ready? Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud and is about to come to Egypt. The idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence. Do you remember when Jesus said, I will come in the glory of my Father? Right? That's what he said. I'm pretty sure. Maybe we should examine this a little bit. Let's check this out. Ready? Come with me to the book of Mark. I made mention of this passage a little earlier, but let's look at it. You ready for this? This is Mark chapter 8 and verse 38. Now I'm going to read to you before the transition verse. I love the transition verse. Okay, Mark 8, verse 38. Whoever is ashamed of me and my works in this adulterous and sinful generation, the Son of Man will also be ashamed of him when he comes in the glory of his Father with his holy angels. whoa, there's a lot of things here that I really want to talk about. I might take a moment and do this. Notice what he said. Whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this adulterous and sinful generation. Is that our generation? Or who was he talking to? He said this adulterous and sinful generation. He said these events, Matthew chapter 24, verse 34. These events will happen in the lifetime of the people standing here. He says exactly the same thing here, essentially. When was these events to take place? In this adulterous and sinful generation. And he said the Son of Man is going to be ashamed of them when he comes. He just said, I'm coming in your generation, and if you can't handle these eschatological facts, then I'm going to be ashamed of you. If you reject my words, the things that I'm talking about, the prophecies being fulfilled, then I'm going to be ashamed of you when I come if you're ashamed of me. That's pretty stout stuff. Jesus was saying you're going to be judged. And you'll be found wanting at that point. Listen to this. Let me read this again if that didn't soak in. I hate to borrow this phrase, so I'm not going to use it, but I will use something that I think is just as good. Powerful. Romans 1:16. I'm not ashamed of the gospel of Christ. This is the gospel. It is powerful. This is unto salvation. Friends, what part of the gospel can we leave out? I don't know. Someone tell me what part of the gospel we can leave out and it's okay. Just saying. This is part of the gospel. These are the words of Jesus. And he said, I'll be ashamed of you when I come. I'm coming in your generation, and I'm going to come in the glory of my Father. Now, what does that mean? He's going to come in the glory of his Father. Did you see how his Father came and the glory that he came? If we were to do a study on clouds, you're going to see time and time and time again that when the Lord came in the Old Testament, Yahweh came in the Old Testament, how did he do it? In clouds. When he came to the tent, what was he in? He was obscured by a cloud. When he was on the top of the mountain, what was Yahweh in? How did he come? In a cloud. Obscured, they couldn't see him. The whole top of the mountain was obscured by the cloud. I'm going to come in the glory of my Father, he says. How did Jesus say he was going to come in the glory of his Father? How did Yahweh come? In this instance, this is real clear. On a cloud. He's riding on a cloud. Now, do you think he was like the Silver Surfer, and here he is on that cloud, and he's just hanging 10 on the cloud, and everybody's watching that, and he's doing loop-de-loops? No, that's not what he was doing. This is figurative language, and he comes on a cloud. Jesus said, I'm going to come in the glory of my Father. Remember what the man in white in Acts chapter 1, 9 through 11 said? You men of Galilee, why are you looking upwards? Do you not realize that he's coming back as he left? And by the way, Yahweh was obscured by a cloud on the mountain. He was obscured by a cloud in the temple. He was obscured by a cloud in the tent of meeting. He's obscured by a cloud every single time we see Yahweh coming in the Old Testament. And Jesus, when he left, guess what? A cloud received them out of their sight. He was obscured by a cloud when he left. And when he comes back, guess what? He's going to be in a cloud. This is a cloud coming. It's a cloud coming. There's no way around that. Now, let's look at some of these other things here in Isaiah 19. Still there in verse 1, the idols of Egypt will tremble at his presence. Do you see that Yahweh was in the cloud and he was present? You know what this is? This is a parousia. This is the description of a parousia. He comes and he's present. This is exactly what Jesus said was going to take place. He would come and be present. His presence would be known to those who cared to see it. You better believe that. Notice what he says here in verse 2. He says, well, I didn't finish verse 1. And the heart of the Egyptians will melt within them. Do you suppose that all of the Egyptians' hearts melted literally within them? No, it's figurative language. Now, if we were to go through the rest of this, you're going to see that there's something referred to about judgment coming upon Egypt. And I know I'm kind of truncating a lot of this, but he said in verse 16, in that day. Okay, let's let that soak in for a minute. He says, in that day, the Egyptians will become like women. Yeah, he says they're going to be like women. They will tremble and be in dread because of the waving of the hand of the Lord of hosts. Do you suppose? I mean, honestly, is this literal? Did Yahweh come to Egypt and wave his hand over the land of Egypt in a literal sense, or was this figurative? He talks about in that day. This is when judgment was occurring because of the waving of the hand of the Lord. Notice what he says here. The land of Judah will become a terror to Egypt. Everyone to whom is mentioned will be in dread of it. Now, who was Egypt being judged by, or who is Yahweh using? Now, let's keep reading. Because of the purpose of the Lord of hosts when he is purposing against them. In verse 18, he says, in that day. In verse 19, he says, in that day. In verse 21, he says, in that day. 23, in that day. 24, in that day. Do you see where we're going with this? This term, in that day, is very, very significant. Judgment occurred in that day. Now, let's look at something else. Let's go to Zechariah. We haven't even got started with the good stuff yet. Okay, but we got to go to Zechariah. Chapter, really it's 12, 13, and 14. Let me illustrate. This is judgment. Okay, now this is judgment regarding who? Well, let's see if we can figure this out right off the bat, so there's no guessing. So, Zechariah chapter 12, verse 1, the burden of the word of the Lord concerning who? Go ahead and say it out loud. Shout it at the screen. I can't hear you. It's Israel. Okay, the burden of the word of the Lord concerning Israel. Now notice what he says. You ready for this? Thus declares the Lord, who stretches out the heavens, lays the foundation of the earth, and forms the spirit of man within him. Behold, I am going to make Jerusalem a cup that causes reeling to all the peoples around. When the siege is laid against Jerusalem, it will also be against Judah. Whoa, that's a lot. And it will come about, listen to this. What did we just read in Isaiah 19? It will come about in that day that I will make Jerusalem a heavy stone for all the peoples. All who lift it will be severely injured. All the nations of the earth will be gathered against it in that day. See, this is where we've been talking about judgment from Matthew chapter 25 and verse 31. This is this judgment. These nations are being gathered together against it. In that day, verse 4, declares the Lord, I will strike every horse with bewilderment and his rider with madness. We see this imagery used in Revelation. I will watch over the house of Judah while I strike every horse of the peoples with blindness. The clans of Judah will say in their hearts, a strong support for us are the inhabitants of Jerusalem through the Lord of hosts, their God. In that day, I will make the clans of Judah like a firepot among pieces of wood and a flaming torch among the sheaves, so they will consume on the right hand and on the left hand all the surrounding peoples. Do you see what he's talking about? Let's keep reading. Verse 8, he says, in that day, the Lord will defend the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and the one who is feeble among them in that day will be like David, and the house of David will be like God, like the angel of the Lord before them. Verse 9, in that day I will set about to destroy all the nations that come against Jerusalem. Well, this is sounding really familiar. This cannot be the first destruction of Jerusalem under the Babylonian siege. It can't be that. We know that it was revealed in 586. This is talking about something that's going to take place in their future. And he's giving you a time statement. How many times does he have to say in that day? Look how many times he says, let me count this here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. In 3 verses. 15 times he says in that day. So do you suppose there's an important day coming up? How many times does he have to say it? I'll tell you what. When I proposed to my wife, I'll tell you a little story here. We took a carriage ride. This was downtown Indianapolis, and I'm just a country boy. See, You get it? Okay, so don't shake your head at me. She's doing the SMH. For a long time, I thought that was cussing, an acronym or something. I hope it's not. I don't think it is. It should mean shaking my head. I'm moving on from here. Anyway, so I proposed to her. We took this carriage ride. Well, I didn't propose to her yet. So we're on the carriage ride, and I had that ring in my pocket, and it was burning. It was burning a hole. I know I was acting goofy. She probably thought something was wrong. She's probably thinking, man, I don't even want to be with this guy. Of course, we'd already been together 4 years. Started at age 15. That says a lot. She's the best. She really is. By the way, pray for her. She's going to have some exploratory surgery tomorrow, a heart cath. So please be praying for her. And we need all that we can get. Anyway, back to the story. So this whole carriage ride, I think, lasted about half an hour or something like that. So this whole carriage ride lasted about half an hour, and I kept thinking, when do I pop the question? So the ride was over before I knew it. So we pulled back into the Hyatt Regency in their little drive-through deal. That's where it was coming from. So I get off the carriage first. So I'm acting all chivalrous, right? Like I'm going to help her get down. And I stopped her. And I asked her the question. The carriage driver was a lady. She started crying. And I was great. Well, my wife started crying too. And I was about to start crying. You want to know why? Because she knocked the ring out of my hand and it went under the horse. Oh, man, it was great. Why am I telling you this? Because after that point, we started preparing for that day that was coming up. And I kept being reminded of that day. That was a big day. It was an important thing. They didn't use any language any different than the way that we did. He's emphasizing something here in Zechariah 12, 13, and 14. And he tells you when this day is going to come. Here's a cool fact. In Zechariah 13, it's prophesied that the unclean spirit and the prophet will pass out of the land. Now, I'm just going to say this real quick because we're running out of time. But the spirit and the unclean prophet, when did this last? When did these gifts last? How long did these things last? And when did they come to an end? At the destruction of Jerusalem in that day, they were given as a down payment for the redemption that was to come. Jesus said, it profits you that I depart, because I'll send the Spirit. This is John 16, I think. I'll send the Spirit in my place, that while I'm not here, he will be with you. But notice this, when the Lord returned, the gifts of the Spirit came to an end. Get that? So if there are gifts of the Spirit today, then the Lord will return in the future. So here's my challenge. If you can raise someone from the dead, if you can regenerate someone's arm, if you can bring somebody back to life, then I'll start believing that the Lord is coming in the future, because these events haven't been fulfilled yet. Just something to think about. So this day was something big and it was huge. This is Judgment Day. This is when all of these events are going to take place. Ready? There's even more. Notice what he says. We kind of talked a little bit about chapter 13. Look at chapter 14 of Zechariah. Behold, a day is coming for the Lord when the spoil taken from you will be divided among you, for I will gather all nations against Jerusalem to battle. What day is this? This is when Jerusalem's going to be a siege is laid against it. The nations are coming against it. The spirit and the unclean prophet are passing out of the land. Look at all the proof here. All the time statements. All the irrefutable evidence. And he says, when all these nations are gathered against Jerusalem to battle, and the city will be captured, the houses plundered, the women ravished, on half of the city exiled. But the rest of the people will not be cut off from the city. Then the Lord will go forth and fight against those nations. So do you suppose this is going to be a physical thing? No. He's going to fight against those nations. We've already read that, so we don't need to go there. As when he fights on a day of battle. In that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives, which is in front of Jerusalem on the east, and on the Mount of Olives, which we split in the middle from east to west by a very large valley, so that half of the mountain will move toward the north and the other half toward the south. So where is this going to take place? Jerusalem. How many times does he have to say it? This is just as clear as it can get, if you open your eyes and see it. Through clear lenses, not the rose-tinted lenses of traditionalism and futurism. He says, verse 5, you will flee to the valley of my mountains, for the valley of the mountains will reach to Azel. Yes, you will flee just as you fled before the earthquake in the days of Uzziah, king of Judah. Then the Lord my God will come. Wait a minute. What? At the destruction of Jerusalem, the Lord is going to come and all the holy ones with him. Where have we read that before? Wow. That is nuts. How much clearer does this have to get? I love this. Why didn't I see this before? Verse 6. In that day there will be no light. What did Jesus say in Matthew 24? About verse 29, 30. The stars are going to fall from heaven. The sun and the moon will not give their light. In that day, he says, the luminaries will dwindle, for it will be a unique day. What did Jesus talk about in all of that discourse? This is a day that is known to the Lord, didn't he? And here it is. It will be a unique day which is known to the Lord. Mark this. Zechariah 14 and verse 7. It will be a unique day which is known to the Lord, neither day nor night, but it will come about that at evening time there will be light. In that day, living waters will flow out of Jerusalem. Hebrews chapter 9, verse 26, 27, 28. Salvation's coming in that day. It's the prolepsis. That's too much to talk about. I'm getting ready to run out of time. In that day, living waters will flow out of Jerusalem, half of them toward the eastern sea, the other half toward the western sea. It will be as summer as well as winter. And the Lord will be king over all the earth. He's reigning. Do you not see these elements found in Revelation, in all of that discourse, in all of these other? This is it. This is it. It doesn't get any better than this. And he gives us the time statements about when these things are going to take place. And Jesus actually even said this, didn't he? He said, when this time of distress comes upon Jerusalem, this is when these events are going to take place. And it's never going to happen again. So if you think Judgment Day is going to come in the future, here's some things that you have to have occur at that time. The temple has to be rebuilt. The priesthood has to be rebuilt and repopulated. Here's a good one. Guess what has to appear in the temple? The Ark of the Covenant. Well, Revelation teaches us that it appeared in heaven. It's gone. So it would have to magically appear again. The Jewish people are going to have to be reconstituted. So have you paid your, what is it, $800 to fly a Jew to Israel and repopulate? See what people are doing? They're trying to make these things literal. What else? The Roman government's going to have to be reconstituted. We're going to have emperors. We're going to have Jews persecuting Jews. All of these things are going to have to come. It's not going to happen because it's already happened. Now, let me illustrate this. We'll talk more about this next time. But we're going to have to go to Daniel chapter 12. What is judgment? When is judgment going to happen? Okay. I guess really we've spent most of our time talking about when it's going to happen, establishing that point. We've illustrated that judgment comes from Yahweh on clouds. And Jesus said, I'm going to come in judgment on the cloud just like my Father did in his glory. All that makes sense. But Daniel chapter 12 just sets this. It just sets it in concrete. This isn't going anywhere. Notice what he said, Daniel 12, verse 1 and 2. At that time, wait a minute, do we have another one of these statements? At that time? That day? Well, what time is he talking about? It's this time during this Roman period that Daniel prophesied. Daniel just lays out history for about 400 years. And right up to that point is when the Lord comes the first time, born of a virgin, that coming. So he comes the first time for sin to take care of that. Okay? And then he comes again. All of these events are just to take place. Wow, we're just so far out of time. We need to spend a lot of time in Daniel. But what we're going to do, I want to set this with Daniel 12, verse 1 and 2. So this is when this time is going to take place. It's not in the future. It's at this time. Now, I think back in verse 36 of 11 is when this does transition to a new king. This is the legitimate transition verse. So he starts talking about the king that is coming. And I think this is Herod that he's talking about. Okay? So at that time, these things are going to take, excuse me, these things are going to take place. He says, Michael, the great prince who stands guard over the sons of your people, the sons of your people. So it's not them from that generation, it's their sons, the following generations, will arise. And he tells you when this is going to be. Will arise, and there will be a time of distress such as never occurred since there was a nation until that time. That's exactly what Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24. He said, this will occur at a time of distress such as never occurred or ever will again. So Jesus uses parallelism. He's quoting, and he says it's never going to happen again. So we know that this occurred in 70. So what are the events that are going to occur in 70? He says, at that time, your people, everyone who's found written in the book, will be rescued. Many of those who sleep in the dust of the ground will awake. These to everlasting life, and others to everlasting disgrace and everlasting contempt. Okay, so what's going to happen when Jerusalem is destroyed at this time period in the first century? What's going to happen? Well, guess what? Here's what's going to happen. We are seeing that those who are asleep in the dust of the ground will awake. That's resurrection. We see that they come out to judgment of the just and the unjust. That's John chapter 5. Revelation chapter 20. We see Revelation 21 put in here. This is amazing. This is amazing. Here it is, right in front of us. All we have to do is look at it and see it. Now, as we go through this, and we'll look here more next week in Daniel chapter 12. We're going to see these time statements that cannot be ignored. They cannot be denied. So we're going to have to look at these time statements. We're going to have to see when these events were to take place. And then here's what it comes down to. You're going to have to decide, are you going to take the Lord at his word and believe what he said, or are you going to be ashamed of his words, his eschatology? Which one is it? Well, we're out of time. Lots of good comments. I'm sure I wasn't able to read any of those. Please tell everybody, be back with us next week. This is just getting good. This is the stuff. This is the stuff that just turns you're on and lights your brain on fire and makes you think. I can't light my brain on fire too many more times. It's going to melt. Just like the hearts of the Egyptians, right? I had to put that in. Okay. Let me say it this way before we close. Be back with us next week. Tell everybody about this. This is amazing stuff. We've been lied to, and it's time to see the truth. We're being restored. We have that opportunity. Are you going to be left behind, believing the lies of the past, or are you going to see the truth the way they saw it in the first century? Be back with us next time. Love everybody out there. Please don't forget to pray for my wife and all the surgeries and things that are lined up for her. And we would just certainly appreciate that so much. And see you next week. Remember, don't forget, study to show yourself approved unto God. Thank you much.